How much are people paying for hay on a ton basis right now? How many are paying over $200 a ton? 175 and over. Raise your hand. Less than 150, raise your hand. No hands are going up. So anyway, I just know it's expensive. I'm going to talk to you about good follow-up to Bob's presentation on determining quantity and quality of forage. And do I go this way? There we go. So what we need to figure out are a couple of different things. One is how much grass do we have, and also how much are they going to eat. Okay, those two fundamental things, and we can do that. There's a lot of variability in how forage grows, okay? And here is the Sierra Field Station, and oh great, there's a laser pointer. And so what you've got here is you're looking at this green line, that's the amount of rainfall, and then these bars right here, that's the amount of forage production that's occurring. So when we have a lot of rain, we have a lot of feed. Less rain, we have less feed, which is kind of in a way duh. But in the other sense, you know, a lot of times we tend to stock according to what the average is. But you can see that that average, even though it's going to vary quite a bit. Let's look at the next slide. See, the average is 2850 pounds per acre, but the range, look at that, 1,100 pounds all the way up to 4,700 pounds. We had 4 years, this is like 1982, 1999, somewhere around in there, that the forage production was less than 2,500 pounds, and then we also had another 4 years where it was over 3,200 pounds. So we've got to understand how much forage supply that we have here, because that impacts what we're doing with our stocking rates. Now, we don't know how much total forage is going to be grown when we enter into the rainy season, but we do know when that forage is going to grow. Here you can see this is field station on hand. You can see we get a little bit of stuff in December, and it pokes along in January and February, kind of bumps up here in March, really takes a climb in April, and all of a sudden really booms right here in May, and just a little bit of right after, say by mid-May, we hit a peak forage condition. Unfortunately, this year, we're kind of still right in here. We're waiting for the rains to get this bump, but we don't have that bump yet. And that's what can really drive you crazy. We've got the warm temperatures, okay? The soil temperatures are right there, but we don't have the moistures to get that grass to grow. But if we can just get a little bit more rain, then finally we can kind of start to bump up into here. So this is kind of the theoretical growth pattern, but Mother Nature is never theoretical, is she? She's always doing stuff to us. So if we want to know how much feed that we need to have, here are some options that we have. We can clip, we can use a ruler, we can do a Foursquare to determine how much feed we have. We can use a rising plate meter, and we can also use a Pasture Probe. And there's some other techniques as well. And the other thing that, in addition to knowing how much feed that we have, last week we had a niche meat marketing conference, and we had a guy named Jim Garish come and speak at that conference, and he made a real key point, especially if you are doing some grass finishing, or let's say you're in a stocker enterprise and you're really trying to maximize gain. Big thing on there is the number one impact on intake is the amount of residual that we leave behind. Here, if we take that residual down more, that will impact intake later on. If we can leave more residual, that will keep intake at a much higher level type of a thing. And so that's kind of a key point, because a lot of times you always want to try and leave them in there that extra couple of days to be sure you get all that feed done. But if you'll leave more residual, it will help in keeping more gains going. And again, this is just an example. This is at the California Grazing Academy. We've got that coming up May 2nd and 4th. People try and allocate enough feed to feed their small herd here for a day. If this was grass finishing, we've taken that down too far. We would want to leave more residual there because we would want to keep getting the gains on those steers. If we're on a maintenance thing with the cows, that's going to be a different story. If we're talking about clipping, we need a square foot frame, or we can use a circular type of thing. What we would do is we would have a brown bag. We would pre-weigh that bag with a gram scale, and then we would clip the forage down to the ground, okay, so that you're staying consistency. I would recommend clipping it all the way down to the ground. Then here's your bag, your feed's in there, and then you're going to weigh that sample again, and now you've already accounted for the weight of the bag, so that is going to give you a wet weight, because we still have a lot of moisture in that grass. Then we've got to dry it. Here at the field station, they've got ovens that we can put those in and dry those for about a week. You can always put it up in the on your windshield there in your pickup, let it dry out. That way you can even put it in a microwave oven. But be sure you put a little bit of water, a cup of water in there, so that you don't set your microwave on fire, because that can happen. So you dry it down, and then you re-weigh the sample, and that's the dry weight. That's the actual weight that you have onto there. And then once you've weighed that sample, you can multiply that by 96, and that's a magic conversion factor that takes the weight in grams to now how many pounds per acre that you have. Now, you're not going to be able to just get by with just taking one clip sample, because you've got a lot of variability that's out there. So you're going to need to go out. If it's a fairly uniform area, maybe you could get by with around 10 samples. If you have a lot of variability, you're probably going to have to do a fair amount of clipping in order to really get a sense on how much the forage variability is out there. By the way, all the stuff we're talking about from like Bob Steele and what I'm talking to other speakers are in your proceedings. Here's just a sample table to where you could set that up on a spreadsheet, so that then you could look at what your dry weight was, multiply it by 96, and come up with an average finally to find out how much feed that you have. Another thing would just to be able to get your eye trained on, well, what's the height of the feed, and maybe how does that correlate to pounds per acre or whatever. You could just take a ruler out there, some sort of measuring stick that's marked out with some graduations, and begin to get a real good idea of, okay, normally when I go in, I'm going in about 12 or 15 inches, and when I'm coming out, maybe there's 2 inches, maybe there's 3 inches, maybe there's 4 inches, so that you can begin to get a sense on just at least kind of general height of feed. You could even do some clipping to kind of correlate, well, if I have 12 inches of feed, that's going to kind of give me so much amount of feed that I have. And you can do that both before, and you could also do that afterwards as well, to give you a sense on how much residual that I'm leaving behind. Another thing that we teach at the Grazing Academy is to do a forage square. We get out, we break people into teams. If you have 4 people, that works well. If you only have a couple of people, you can also take some fiberglass fencing rods to help do your other corners. But essentially, people are standing at a corner, and they are looking at the feed inside of here. They maybe walk out about 10, like here's our center person, and this person walks out 10 paces, this person walks out 10 paces, and then this person kind of lines up to where we complete the square. And you look into there, you look at the animal, let's say you got a 1,200-pound cow, and you try and make an estimate of, okay, how big a square do I need to feed that cow for one day? So everybody kind of looks at that. If they don't think it's big enough, everybody takes a step back. If they think it's too big, you would take a step in. And finally you get to where everybody's in agreement, and then this person walks back, this person walks back, counting their steps. And this is a real good method, because you can do a lot of work in a short period of time, especially once your eye gets trained. And then from there you can actually look at how many stock days you have for the rest of the year. And so here's kind of, again, how you do that. You're pacing off the area, and then after you say, here's a 10 by 10 square, if this person walks back to here and this person walks back to there, they're counting their paces, so that's giving you how many yards. So in other words, if it was a 10 by 10 square, and we said that was a big enough area to feed that cow for one day and still leave whatever our adequate residual target was, that 10 by 10 is 100, okay, and we could divide that 100 into the number of square yards that are in our acre, which is 4,840. So here's our square, 10 by 10, 4840, divided by 100 gives us 48.4 stock days per acre. Then at that paddock was 12 acres in size, 48 times 12 gives us 580 stock days in that paddock. So we can actually make an estimate of how many stock days we've got left to allocate out for the rest of the year. That's why if we do this at the end of the growing season on our annuals, this gives us how, in effect, we're counting the bales of hay that are out there to help us get an estimate of how much feed we have. Then from there we can look at how many head we have to look at the demand to see if that's matching up. The beauty of that is in May I can know whether I've got enough feed to feed my herd on the standing feed that's there, if I go with Bob's supplementation to keep that consumption high, or if I'm short and it looks like I've got to do something different, it gives me some time to develop some strategies versus waiting till September or so and running out of feed and then wondering what you're going to have to do next. Then the big thing about that square for everybody is, how do I know my square is accurate? Well, the only way you can do that is just to test it. And if, for example, you go out in a field, you do your square, and you think, God, I think if I put the herd in here for 5 days, well, then you could put that herd in there for 5 days, and when they go out, take a look at the residual that's left. If it looks about right, then you know your estimate was about right. If there's a lot of feed left, then maybe you've got your estimate needs to be a little bit was off a little bit, or if it's not enough, or if less feed was left, then again you need to do that estimate. Or you can just do that with just a small number of animals, and in a couple of days you can really kind of get that estimate down to where you'll have some confidence. And this is where this can all get to you. We had a research project out on the Campbell, which is in the back 40 here. We had 23 range paddocks, and we would go through, Dave Pratt and I, we could walk through those 23 paddocks in about 2 hours, and we would do squares. And so in the middle of May, we knew that we had almost about 21,600 stock days that were left from May to get us through till maybe end of November type of a thing, depending on when the rains would occur. And then we could do a feed budget to see if we were okay. Rising plate meter, I think there's supposed to be a photo there that didn't show up. But Morgan Doran, who's here, he and I and several other people worked on a project where we were raising sheep and vineyards. And this rising plate meter is just a thing that you actually just put that, there's a tip. And so if here's the grass, you put that tip down, and then there's a plate that comes down, and it drops down, and there's like a little reading that tells you how far down that thing went. That number in itself doesn't mean much, but then if you come back after they've grazed, and then you do that again, you can look at what that difference is, and then you can do some clipping to kind of get some correlation there. This is a pasture probe. This is an electronic probe. This actually allows you to go in and take a readout. Some limitations with this is that the forage needs to be probably 18 inches or less. So if we get into a spring flush, it's going to be tough. Also, you have to get those equations kind of calibrated to make that work, and those are expensive. So something like clipping is going to be cheap. Something like doing the forage squares is going to be cheap, but you also have other things that you can look at doing too. This is just a quick rundown on average forage quality for energy and crude protein. These are based on 36 monthly samples that were done over a 3-year period out there on the Campbell. All this is doing is just showing, look at protein, see how that's climbing up through March, then it starts to decline through April and May, and then into June, and then it really starts to crash right in here. And it's at this point in time that you're going to need to think about having that protein supplement that Bob was talking about, so you can keep the consumption high on those annual feeds, because then you're still feeding the microbes. See, the supplement is feeding the rumens, the microbes in the rumen. You're not feeding the animal directly. And then you can see how energy starts to climb and then starts to decline. Like that 0.66 there for net energy, that's kind of like alfalfa quality feed. And then you can see how the annuals just kind of decline throughout the rest of the year until rains start again. And this is how all of this, the influence of forage quality on forage requirement and actual intake. If we have high quality forage, and here's the daily requirement, okay, we can meet that very easily. However, if this is the daily requirement on low quality forage, if we don't supplement for that protein, what will happen is we won't get the consumption that we need to meet the requirement, and that's why they end up losing weight. These are looking at the relationship of energy and available degradable protein. And what this is showing right here in the black is that's how much protein we have available, and then there's the requirement right there. So we've got to supplement that to be sure that works. Here that was showing in October, even as late as December, but if you'll notice, we're pretty even right here in July and August and September, so you probably need to get that supplement out to make that work. John's going to take you through body condition scoring. One last thing that you can do as far as assessing forage quality is if your manure piles are flat, then you have good quality forage. Okay? If you're starting to see your manure piles get tall, that means your forage quality is going down. So that's just kind of one last little tip there.